The October rain hammered against the windows of Roosevelt High School in Portland, Oregon, creating a rhythmic percussion that seemed to echo through the empty hallways. Mrs. Patricia Henderson stood at the front of her 11th grade English literature class, her voice cutting through the drowsy afternoon atmosphere as she discussed the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. Maya Chen, she called out sharply, her eyes landing on the slight girl in the back row who sat with her head slightly bowed, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. Can you explain what the green light represents in Chapter 1? Silence. The classroom, which had been filled with the rustling of papers and whispered conversations, fell completely quiet. 28 pairs of eyes turned toward Maya, who remained motionless in her seat, her gaze fixed on the open book before her. Maya, Mrs. Henderson repeated, her tone edged with impatience. I asked you a question. Still nothing. Maya's fingers gripped the edges of her textbook, her knuckles turning white, but she didn't lift her head or open her mouth to speak. Mrs. Henderson felt her jaw tighten. In her 23 years of teaching, she had dealt with plenty of difficult students, the class clowns, the troublemakers, the ones who talked back. But there was something about Maya's silence that irritated her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. It felt like defiance wrapped in shyness, a refusal to participate that undermined her authority. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice rising as she addressed the entire class. Some students think they can just sit here like furniture, taking up space, expecting to pass without putting in any effort. Silence isn't an option in my classroom. If you can't contribute to class discussions, maybe you don't belong in advanced placement English. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jessica Martinez, who sat 2 rows ahead of Maya, turned around with a concerned look, but Maya's expression remained unchanged, blank, distant, as if she had retreated somewhere deep inside herself where Mrs. Henderson's words couldn't reach. You know what your problem is? Mrs. Henderson continued, warming to her subject. Her frustration from a difficult morning, a flat tire, a missed dentist appointment, and a tense email from the principal, seemed to pour out in Maya's direction. You act like you're too good to participate, like everyone else is beneath you. That kind of attitude won't get you anywhere in life. The real world doesn't reward people who just sit quietly in the corner. The bell rang, mercifully ending the tirade. Students gathered their books quickly, eager to escape the tension that had settled over the room like a fog. Maya was the first to leave, slipping out the door with her backpack clutched to her chest, her head still down. Harsh, whispered Tyler Brown to his friend as they filed out. Even for Henderson. Mrs. Henderson didn't hear him. She was already erasing the whiteboard, trying to shake off the lingering discomfort of her own words. There was something about the way Maya had looked, or rather hadn't looked at her, that left a bad taste in her mouth. But she pushed the feeling aside. The girl needed to learn to speak up. That was all there was to it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of lesson plans and grading. By the time the final bell rang at 3:15, Mrs. Henderson was exhausted. She had parking lot duty, which meant standing in the drizzling rain with a fluorescent vest, while students poured out of the building toward waiting cars and buses. She watched the familiar parade of vehicles, beat-up Hondas driven by seniors, gleaming SUVs piloted by hovering parents, the distinctive yellow of school buses. Then she noticed Maya standing alone under the overhang near the science building. Her thin jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, despite its obvious inadequacy against the October chill. Minutes ticked by. 10, then 15. The parking lot emptied. Still, Maya waited. Finally, a silver truck pulled up, not new but well-maintained. A man stepped out, and Mrs. Henderson felt her breath catch slightly. He was tall, probably in his late 30s, with dark hair graying at the temples and tired lines around his eyes. He wore blue scrubs with a hospital badge clipped to his chest. Maya's entire demeanor changed. Her shoulders, which had been hunched and tense all day, relaxed. A small smile, the first Mrs. Henderson had ever seen on the girl's face, appeared as she hurried toward the truck. "Sorry I'm late, sweetheart," Mrs. Henderson heard him say as he pulled Maya into a quick hug. "3 surgeries ran long and the traffic on I-5 was a nightmare." "It's okay, Dad," Maya said softly. Speaking, Mrs. Henderson realized with a start. The girl could speak. Her voice was quiet but clear, tinged with warmth that had been completely absent in the classroom. Mrs. Henderson felt something twist in her stomach. She turned away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring, but the image of Maya's smile lingered in her mind as she headed back inside to collect her things. The following Tuesday, Mrs. Henderson found herself in the administration building for a meeting about the upcoming scholarship ceremony. Roosevelt High's annual event was a big deal. Local business leaders attended, as did several members of the school board. It was held in the wing of the building that had been renovated 5 years ago, funded entirely by private donations. "We'll need you to present 3 of the scholarships," Principal Rodriguez said, sliding a folder across the conference table. "The Chen Memorial Scholarship for Academic Excellence, the Chen Arts Scholarship, and the Chen STEM Initiative Award. You know how important the Chen family scholarships are to this school." Mrs. Henderson nodded absently, flipping through the folder. Then she stopped, her eyes catching on a name printed at the top of the informational sheet. "Chen?" she asked slowly. "As in Dr. Michael Chen," Principal Rodriguez confirmed. His late wife, Dr. Sarah Chen, graduated from Roosevelt in 1998. After she passed away 4 years ago, Dr. Chen established these scholarships in her memory. He's donated over $2 million to the school, funded the entire East Wing renovation, the new computer lab, the music program expansion. He's one of our most generous benefactors. Mrs. Henderson's mouth went dry. She looked up at the wall where she'd passed countless times without really paying attention. There, on a brass plaque near the doorway, were the words, "Chen Family Learning Center." "He has a daughter here, doesn't he?" she heard herself ask. "Maya, Junior, brilliant student, though very quiet, understandable, given what she's been through. Losing her mother to cancer at 13. Principal Rodriguez shook his head. "Doctor, Chen works incredible hours at the hospital. He's one of the top cardiac surgeons in the Pacific Northwest, but he never misses a parent-teacher conference or school event. Remarkable man." Mrs. Henderson felt the room spin slightly. The memory of her words from the previous week crashed over her like a cold wave. Some students think they can just sit here like furniture. That kind of attitude won't get you anywhere in life. "Are you all right, Patricia?" Principal Rodriguez asked. "You look pale." "I'm fine," she managed. I need to check on something." She left the meeting early, her mind racing. As she walked through the newly renovated hallway, the Chen Family Learning Center, she noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The state-of-the-art smartboards in every classroom, the comfortable seating areas where students studied between classes, the well-stocked library with its rows of new computers. All of it, funded by the father of the girl she had publicly humiliated. Mrs. Henderson reached her classroom and sank into her desk chair, her hands shaking slightly. She thought about Maya's silence, her withdrawn demeanor. She thought about what it must be like to lose your mother at such a young age, to navigate high school grief while your father worked 70-hour weeks trying to save other people's lives. And she thought about her own words, sharp and cutting, delivered in front of 28 witnesses to a girl who was already carrying more than anyone should have to bear. For the first time in her 23-year career, Patricia Henderson felt the full weight of how badly she had failed a student, and she had no idea how to make it right. The next morning, Mrs. Henderson arrived at school an hour before classes started. The October sun was just beginning to break through Portland's perpetual cloud cover, casting long shadows across the parking lot. She had barely slept, her mind replaying that moment in class over and over like a cruel loop. She needed to understand Maya better. After logging into her computer, she pulled up the girl's records, something she should have done long ago. Maya Chen, GPA 4.0. Perfect attendance for the past 3 years. except for a 2-week absence in March of her freshman year, the week her mother died and the funeral that followed. Member of the National Honor Society, volunteer at Providence Hospital on weekends, editor of the school literary magazine, though she worked behind the scenes, never attending the public readings. Mrs. Henderson scrolled through the comments from other teachers. Exceptional written work. Rarely speaks in class, but demonstrates deep understanding through her essays. Mr. Johnson, history, brilliant mathematical mind, prefers to work independently. Ms. Patel, calculus. One of the most talented artists I've taught in 15 years. Her portfolio on grief and memory is profound beyond her years. Mrs. Kim, AP Art. The pattern was clear. Maya wasn't defiant or lazy. She was grieving, processing trauma in the only way she knew how, through silence and solitary work. Mrs. Henderson closed the file, feeling sick. How had she missed this? How had she looked at this girl for 2 months and seen only what she perceived as attitude? The answer was uncomfortable. She hadn't bothered to look deeper. She had made assumptions, let her frustration cloud her judgment, and lashed out at a student who was already struggling. The hallways began to fill with students. Mrs. Henderson watched through her classroom window as Maya walked past, alone as always, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes on the ground. She wanted to call out to her, to apologize, but something held her back. Fear, perhaps. Shame, certainly. The first period bell rang. Students filed in, including Maya, who took her usual seat in the back. Mrs. Henderson tried to catch her eye, but the girl's gaze remained firmly fixed on her desk. Today, we're going to discuss The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, Mrs. Henderson began, her voice less commanding than usual. It's a story about voice, about being silenced, about what happens when we don't listen to people who are trying to tell us something important. She hadn't planned this lesson change. She'd meant to continue with Fitzgerald, but somehow it felt necessary. As she spoke about the narrator's descent into madness, about how her husband dismissed her concerns and her need to express herself, Mrs. Henderson found herself thinking about all the ways society silences people, especially young women, especially those who are grieving. Sometimes, she said slowly, silence isn't a choice. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism, and sometimes those of us who should be listening fail to understand that. A few students looked at her strangely. This wasn't her usual teaching style, but Jessica Martinez, Maya's classmate, nodded thoughtfully, and Mrs. Henderson noticed her glance back at Maya with something like approval. After class, Mrs. Henderson tried to approach Maya, but the girl slipped out quickly as if anticipating the attempt. The same thing happened after third period. By lunch, Mrs. Henderson felt desperate. She found Principal Rodriguez in his office. "I need to apologize to Maya Chen," she said without preamble, "properly. But I think I need some guidance." Principal Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment. "Patricia, I've known you for 15 years. You're a good teacher. What's going on?" The story spilled out. Her harsh words, her assumptions, her complete failure to see Maya as a whole person. To his credit, Principal Rodriguez didn't lecture her. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Sarah Chen, Maya's mother, was my student when I taught biology here. Brilliant woman. She became a pediatric oncologist, spent her life helping children with cancer. The irony that she died of the very disease she fought against." He shook his head. "Dr. Chen told me once that Maya stopped speaking much after Sarah died. Not completely, just less. She saves her words, makes them count. Her therapist says it's her way of processing." "I didn't know," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "That's the thing about students," Principal Rodriguez said gently. We can't always know what they're carrying, but we can choose to approach them with compassion rather than judgment. Maya will be in my office at 2:30 today for a scholarship committee meeting. If you want to talk to her, come by at 2:45. I'll give you some privacy." At 2:45, Mrs. Henderson stood outside the principal's office, her heart pounding. Through the window, she could see Maya sitting in one of the chairs, looking small and tired. Principal Rodriguez gestured for Mrs. Henderson to enter, then excused himself with a meaningful look. Maya's eyes widened slightly when she saw her teacher, and her body tensed, preparing for flight. "Maya," Mrs. Henderson said quickly before the girl could leave, "please, I need to talk to you. I need to apologize." Maya remained seated but said nothing, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. Mrs. Henderson sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "What I said to you last week was cruel, unfair, and completely wrong. I made assumptions about you without knowing anything about who you are or what you've been through. I was frustrated about things that had nothing to do with you, and I took it out on you in front of your peers. That was inexcusable." Maya's expression didn't change, but Mrs. Henderson thought she saw a slight softening in her eyes. "I've spent the last day reading your work," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Your essays are extraordinary. Your analysis of literature shows a depth of understanding that most of my college students didn't have. You contribute to class in meaningful ways, just not in the way I was narrow-mindedly expecting." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I learned about your mother. I can't imagine what you've been through, what you're still going through. And I want you to know that your silence isn't a problem. It's not defiance or laziness or any of the terrible things I implied. It's yours and it's valid, and I should have respected that from the beginning." For a long moment, Maya just looked at her. Then, so quietly that Mrs. Henderson almost missed it, she said, "She used to tell me that words are powerful, that I should only use them when they matter." Mrs. Henderson felt tears prick her eyes. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Maya said, her voice still soft but steady. "She saved a lot of kids. She always said, everyone deserves to be seen, really seen, not just looked at." The implication was clear, and it hit Mrs. Henderson like a physical blow. She hadn't seen Maya. She'd only looked at her surface, made a snap judgment, and acted on it. "You're right," Mrs. Henderson said, "and I'm sorry. I know that doesn't undo what I said, but I want to do better. I want to be a teacher who sees her students, who sees you." Maya nodded slowly. "My dad always says everyone makes mistakes. He says it's what you do after that shows who you really are." "Your dad sounds wise, too." A ghost of a smile crossed Maya's face. "He tries. He works a lot, but he tries." They sat in silence for a moment, but it was different from the tense silence of the classroom. This felt like understanding, like a tentative bridge being built. "Can I ask you something?" Mrs. Henderson said. "Your essays are incredible, especially your personal narrative about memory and loss. Have you ever thought about reading one at the literary magazine showcase?" Maya's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "I can't. I don't do public speaking." "I understand," Mrs. Henderson said. "But if you ever change your mind, I think your words would mean something to people, not because you owe anyone your voice, but because what you have to say is important, worth hearing." Maya looked down at her hands. "Maybe," she said quietly, "someday." When Mrs. Henderson left the office, she felt lighter than she had in days. The conversation hadn't erased what she'd done, but it was a start, a beginning of making things right. That evening, she stayed late in her classroom, revising her teaching methods. She created alternative participation options, written responses, small group discussions, recorded reflections, ways for students like Maya to engage without the pressure of public performance. As she worked, she kept thinking about Dr. Chen's donations, his quiet generosity that had transformed the school. The Chen Family Learning Center wasn't just about money, it was about a father's love for his daughter, his late wife's memory, his belief in education as a vehicle for healing and hope. Mrs. Henderson had walked through this building for 5 years without truly seeing the gift that had been given. just as she had looked at Maya for 2 months without truly seeing the remarkable young woman in her classroom. She was determined to never make that mistake again. 3 weeks later, the morning of the annual scholarship ceremony dawned clear and bright, a rare November day in Portland when the sun actually won its battle with the clouds. Mrs. Henderson stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her dress for the 3rd time, nervous in a way she hadn't been for a school event in years. She would be presenting 3 scholarships established by Dr. Michael Chen. More importantly, she would be meeting him formally for the first time. The thought made her stomach churn with a mixture of anxiety and shame. The ceremony was held in the school auditorium at 10 o'clock. The space was packed. Students, parents, teachers, school board members, and local business leaders filled every seat. Mrs. Henderson sat on stage with the other presenting teachers and administrators, her eyes scanning the crowd. She spotted Dr. Chen immediately. He sat in the 3rd row wearing a dark suit instead of his hospital scrubs, looking tired but proud. Beside him sat Maya, wearing a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Mrs. Henderson was struck by how much they looked alike. The same dark eyes, the same serious expression, the same quiet dignity. Principal Rodriguez opened the ceremony with remarks about the importance of community support for education. Then he spoke specifically about the Chen family scholarships. 4 years ago, our school community lost one of our own, he said, his voice carrying through the auditorium. Dr. Sarah Chen, class of 1998, was a gifted healer and a dedicated advocate for children. Her husband, Dr. Michael Chen, honored her memory by establishing scholarships that have changed the lives of dozens of students. The Chen Memorial Scholarships represent not just financial support, but a legacy of compassion, excellence, and service. The audience applauded. Dr. Chen stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition, then sat back down, placing his hand on Maya's shoulder in a gesture of quiet comfort. When it was time to present the scholarships, Mrs. Henderson stepped to the podium, her prepared remarks clutched in her slightly trembling hands. She called up the first recipient, a senior planning to study nursing, and handed her the certificate and check. Then the second, a young artist headed to the Rhode Island School of Design. "The final Chen scholarship I'll be presenting today," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice steadying as she went, "is the Chen Memorial Scholarship for Academic Excellence. This award goes to a junior who has demonstrated outstanding academic achievement, depth of critical thinking, and a commitment to using education as a tool for understanding the human experience." She paused, looking directly at the 3rd row. At Maya. "This year's recipient has challenged me, and I believe has challenged many of us, to reconsider what excellence looks like. She reminds us that brilliance doesn't always announce itself loudly. That profound insight can exist in quiet observation. That some of the most important voices are the ones we have to lean in closely to hear." Maya's eyes widened. She looked at her father, who was smiling with tears in his eyes. "Maya Chen, would you please come to the stage?" The auditorium erupted in applause. Maya sat frozen for a moment, then slowly stood. She walked down the aisle toward the stage, her movements measured and careful, her head high for perhaps the first time since Mrs. Henderson had known her. As Maya climbed the stairs, Mrs. Henderson felt emotion rise in her throat. This wasn't just about academic achievement or even about redemption. This was about recognition, about finally seeing a student fully and celebrating her for exactly who she was. Maya reached the podium. Mrs. Henderson handed her the certificate and scholarship check, then did something she hadn't planned. She stepped back to the microphone. "Maya, I've had the privilege of teaching you this year, and I want you to know that your work has taught me just as much as I hope I've taught you. Your essays demonstrate a maturity and emotional intelligence that is rare at any age. You write about loss and resilience with the honesty that challenges your readers to sit with difficult truths. You are exactly the kind of student your mother would be proud of, and exactly the kind of scholar this award was created to honor." The audience applauded again. Maya looked directly at Mrs. Henderson for the first time with something approaching warmth in her eyes. She mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Mrs. Henderson nodded, then stepped back as Maya returned to her seat. The ceremony continued with other scholarships and speeches, but Mrs. Henderson barely heard them. She kept watching Maya and her father, the way he pulled her into a tight hug when she returned to her seat, the way she buried her face in his shoulder for just a moment before composing herself again. After the ceremony, Mrs. Henderson made her way through the crowd toward them. Her heart pounded. This was the conversation she'd been dreading. "Doctor." Chen saw her coming and stood, extending his hand. "Mrs. Henderson," he said warmly, "that was a beautiful presentation. Thank you for recognizing Maya." "Dr. Chen," she said, shaking his hand, I need to speak with you, and with Maya, about something that happened a few weeks ago." His expression grew more serious. "All right." They moved to a quieter corner of the lobby. Maya stood close to her father, and Mrs. Henderson noticed how their body language mirrored each other, both standing with arms crossed, both watching her with cautious, intelligent eyes. "Several weeks ago, I said some things to Maya in class that were inappropriate and hurtful," Mrs. Henderson began, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "I called her out for being silent, implied she was lazy or defiant, said things that were completely wrong and unfair. I've apologized to Maya privately, but I wanted you to know as well. There's no excuse for what I said, and I'm deeply sorry." Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He looked down at Maya. "Did she apologize to you?" Maya nodded. "Yes, and she changed how she teaches. She made it better." Dr. Chen turned back to Mrs. Henderson, studying her face. "Maya told me about it when it happened. She also told me about your conversation afterward, and about the changes you've made in your classroom." He paused. "I'm not going to pretend I wasn't angry when I first heard what happened. I was very angry. My daughter has been through more than most adults, and the last thing she needs is to be criticized for how she processes her grief." Mrs. Henderson nodded, accepting the rebuke. "But," Dr. Chen continued, "Maya also told me that you listened, that you changed, that you saw her, really saw her, and adjusted your teaching to support students who engage differently. That matters." "It does," Maya said quietly. Both adults looked at her in surprise. She so rarely volunteered words in these situations. Mrs. Henderson made a mistake, but she fixed it. She didn't just apologize. She changed things. That's important. Mrs. Henderson felt tears threatening again. "Your mother taught you well," she said to Maya, "about words mattering, about forgiveness, about second chances." Maya smiled. A real smile this time, not the ghost of one. "She taught me a lot of things. Dad's been trying to remember all of them, to keep teaching me what she would have wanted." Dr. Chen pulled Maya close, his voice rough with emotion. "We do our best, don't we, sweetheart?" "We do," Maya agreed. Mrs. Henderson felt privileged to witness this moment of tenderness between father and daughter. "Dr. Chen, I also wanted to thank you for what you've done for this school. I've taught here for years, but I'm ashamed to say I never fully appreciated the Chen Family Learning Center, what it represents, what it's made possible. Your generosity has changed countless lives." Dr. Chen shook his head. "Sarah believed education was the foundation of everything. When she died, I needed to do something meaningful with my grief. The scholarships, the renovations, it's all for her and for Maya. So Maya could attend a school that honors learning and supports students in becoming their best selves. The literary magazine showcase is in 2 weeks, Mrs. Henderson said, turning to Maya. "I know public speaking isn't your thing, but if you did want to share your essay, the one about memory and museums, I think people would benefit from hearing it. From hearing you." Maya looked uncertain. "I don't know." "No pressure," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. Just an invitation, if you're ready. Then, over the next 2 weeks, Mrs. Henderson watched Maya carefully, trying not to hover, but wanting to be available if the girl needed support. She noticed small changes. Maya occasionally raised her hand in class now, offering brief comments. She sat with Jessica Martinez and 2 other girls at lunch sometimes, instead of always eating alone. She seemed somehow lighter. The night of the literary magazine showcase arrived. The school library was transformed with soft lighting and rows of chairs facing a small podium. Students, parents, and teachers filled the space. Mrs. Henderson sat in the back, her heart racing with anticipation. 10 students read their work: poetry, short fiction, personal essays. Each piece was talented, polished, heartfelt. But when the student moderator announced, "And finally we have a special reading tonight," Mrs. Henderson sat up straighter. Maya walked to the podium, a single sheet of paper in her hands. She looked terrified. In the front row, Dr. Chen gave her an encouraging nod. "This is called the Museum of Small Things," Maya said, her voice quiet but clear in the hushed library. "It's about my mum." Mrs. Henderson held her breath. Maya began to read. Her voice started soft, almost a whisper, but grew stronger as she progressed. She read about the objects her mother had left behind: a favorite coffee mug, a garden trowel, a stethoscope that now sat on Maya's bookshelf. She read about how grief wasn't one big, overwhelming thing, but rather a collection of small, specific losses that accumulated over time. The loss of her mother's laugh, the loss of her advice, the loss of her presence at dinner, at school events, at ordinary moments. But she also read about what remained, the lessons her mother had taught her. The love that didn't end with death, the way memory could be both painful and precious, how it could hurt and heal simultaneously. By the time Maya finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The silence that followed was profound, not empty, but full, sacred almost. Then the applause began. Not polite, perfunctory applause, but genuine, moved appreciation. Maya looked up, surprised, and Mrs. Henderson saw tears streaming down the girl's face, even as she smiled. Dr. Chen was the first on his feet, leading a standing ovation. Maya stepped away from the podium and walked directly to her father, who wrapped her in his arms and held her while she cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that come with release, with being truly seen and heard. Mrs. Henderson wiped her own eyes, feeling gratitude wash over her. Not for her own role in Maya's journey, that had been fraught with failure before redemption, but for being privileged to witness this moment. To see a young woman who had lost so much find the courage to speak, to share her pain and her love with a room full of people. After the showcase, as people milled around drinking punch and congratulating the readers, Mrs. Henderson approached Maya and Dr. Chen one final time. "That was extraordinary," she told Maya. "Your mother would have been so proud." "She would have cried," Dr. Chen said with a laugh, wiping his own eyes. "Sarah cried at everything: graduations, piano recitals, even particularly good report cards." Maya giggled, an actual giggle, light and young. "She cried at commercials, especially the ones with dogs," Dr. Chen confirmed. They stood together for a moment, the 3 of them bound by the complicated threads of mistakes and forgiveness, loss and growth. "Mrs. Henderson," Maya said, "I wanted to tell you something. What you said that day in class, it hurt. A lot. But it also made me realize that I was using silence as a wall, not just as a way to process. Mom wouldn't have wanted that. She would have wanted me to speak up when it mattered. So, thank you for helping me figure that out, even if it wasn't in the best way." Mrs. Henderson felt humbled by the girl's grace. "You're wiser than I am, Maya. I hope I can continue to learn from you." As Mrs. Henderson drove home that night through Portland's rain-slicked streets, she thought about the journey of the past month, about how easy it was to judge without understanding, how much damage could be done with careless words, but also about how healing could come from genuine apology, changed behavior, and the courage to be vulnerable. She thought about Dr. Chen's quiet strength, working impossible hours to save lives while raising a grieving daughter alone. About how his love and generosity had transformed a school, creating spaces where students like Maya could thrive. Most of all, she thought about Maya, brilliant, grieving, resilient Maya, who had lost her mother but carried her forward in every word she chose to speak, in every essay she wrote, in every small, brave act of sharing her voice with the world. Sometimes teachers taught lessons, and sometimes students taught their teachers what really mattered. Mrs. Henderson had been taught well. The following Monday, she walked into class with renewed purpose. Maya was already in her seat, but this time she looked up when Mrs. Henderson entered. Their eyes met, and Maya smiled. It was a small thing, that smile. But as Mrs. Henderson had learned, small things could carry enormous weight. Small things could change everything. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "Today, we're going to talk about voice, how we find it, how we use it, how we honor it in ourselves and in others." And as she began her lesson, she noticed Maya pulling out her notebook, ready to write, ready to engage, ready to be fully present in a classroom where she finally felt seen. That, Mrs. Henderson thought, was what education was supposed to be about. Not just imparting knowledge, but seeing students, really seeing them, and helping them find the courage to be seen.